So during this lockdown, have you been out shooting?
I've been out shooting some. I've had a few assignments, mostly political assignments here in Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
Um, and I went up to New York for a couple of days, sort of during the height of the pandemic. I just wanted to see what the city was like under lockdown. So yeah, I've gotten out a little bit to do that, but I haven't done it. I just haven't been out that much. I mean, so many of the events and the things that I usually do,
Right.
um, are not happening. I mean, the most interesting thing I've done is the protests. So I was probably shooting for about maybe 4 or 5 days,
Hmm.
and evenings when kind of the political demonstrations started in the U.S. a few weeks ago. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
You're looking forward to hear your stories, your
Mm, mm,
photos, right? Okay.
great.
To all of you just joining, welcome to Leica Conversations. Good evening in Asia and good morning in the US and Europe and wherever you are. So today our guest, we have David Butow from the US. He's a photojournalist. So David is a photojournalist whose project and assignments have taken him to over a dozen of countries, including Afghanistan, Burma, Iraq, Peru, Yemen, and Zimbabwe, and many more. Born in New York and raised in Dallas, he has a degree in government from University of Texas. After college, David moved to Los Angeles, worked in newspapers before beginning a freelance career in magazines in the 1990s. So how was it working in the for the papers at that time in the 1990s, David?
That was actually a pretty good time for newspapers in the United States. It was before before newspapers went primarily online. So there was advertising was very good. There was
Uh-huh.
good budgets, and yeah, I was able to do some traveling when I worked at the newspapers, and it was quite vibrant. And it's also a terrific way to learn as a photojournalist because you do so many different kinds of assignments,
Right.
anything from sports to portraits and
Hmm.
everything in between. So it's really a great training for a photographer to
Yeah.
do that. Mm.
And also in the mid 90s and late 2000s, you worked as a contract photographer for the U.S. News and World Report magazine, covering
Mm.
on social issues, news events such as post 9/11 in New York, the invasion of Iraq. You were in Iraq, I believe, in 2004,
Mm.
and you covered the death of Pope John Paul II at the Vatican. How was it?
Mm. Oh, that was an amazing experience. I remember when that the Pope was starting to fall ill, and it looked like he might not live that long. I asked U.S. News if I could go to Rome to cover that story. He was such an important figure, not only to the Catholics, but really an enormous political figure around the world. And so, um, yeah, that was just a one of a kind experience to be able to be in the city during those days, because obviously so many people came from around the world to kind of pay respects to his memory.
Mhm.
And yeah, I remember finally there were a lot of very, very long days because, working in Europe and then having to take in consideration the deadlines of US publications
Mhm.
and doing all the events there. Yeah, so there were some 18, 20-hour days.
Wow.
But it was a very meaningful sort of experience to see that.
Well, I'm sure we have
Mm.
lots of questions, so I wouldn't jump into the questions right now. From what you just shared, what you just spoke
Mm.
about, covering on the Pope, uh, it's not an easy an assignment getting in because there's a lot of red tape in order to get access.
Mm.
So later we will ask questions about how you get access and how you work, how do you get your photos and what was the process. So once again, welcome, and we have a chat box. So to the audience, if you have any questions for David, please feel free to type in the chat box, and We will answer your questions later down the show. So let's move on to your photo. From political to Zen. And what was this event, David? I
So
believe
this
this was a precedent.
Right. So this is at the White House where the U.S. president lives and where his office is and where the president always spends most of the time. And whenever the president goes somewhere for the day, unless it's right in Washington, he will take a helicopter to fly, usually to an Air Force base, to get on Air Force One. That's just like a 10-minute trip. So the when the president gets on the helicopter, that's a kind of a time when the media can, anybody who's credentialed to go to the White House can go and film that. Sometimes he stops and talks to the press. Sometimes he doesn't. But here, these are the people in this picture are White House staffers. So they've come out to watch the departure of the helicopter. As you know, as it's flying away, and so that's why you see everybody's hair is
Yeah.
blowing around. Yeah.
So was it difficult to get access
It
to?
took to get to the White House. You mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, it took some time. So I lived in California for almost 30 years, and I moved to Washington D.C. After Trump was elected president. So just about 3 years ago, and I came here just to photograph politics during this period. And it took me, yeah, it took several months for me to kind of get the credential to go to the White House. And there are different levels of access there, and there are photographers who work there as part of a small group every day, and they have a little bit better access
Mhm.
to things than somebody like me who's not there every day, you know. So, but this is one of those things that under normal conditions you can't do this during COVID, but you can. Normally, anybody who's credentialed for the White House can go and photograph these departures, as they're called. Yeah.
Right.
Mm.
Okay. Let's see your next photo.
Mm.
And what was this?
So this is in front of the White House. There's a park, a public park that's right across the street from the White House, and this is during the protests that started over the death of an American man, by the police, which some of your viewers may have read about or seen about on television. Um, the um, the death of that man sparked a lot of social unrest in the United States for several days, and the protests became very, political, and eventually became very kind of positive. But there were a few nights where things were really tense, and so the police came out to kind of create sort of a ring around the White House at
Mhm.
different places, and this was sort of one of the early nights of those activity. So
So this was the recent protest demonstration of the death of George Floyd.
correct, the death of George Floyd. So this was I think May 30th is when I took this picture.
Mhm.
Hmm.
Yeah. So how was it? Was it intense? And when you were there?
There were moments of intensity. I mean, compared to some of the other things I've done, it wasn't quite as it wasn't quite as violent, but there were clashes between the demonstrators and police. There was tear gas. There were things that were thrown, from the protesters to the police, and unfortunately, actually, quite a few photographers in the United States were injured in different cities. I mean, these protests happened basically in every major American city, and they can be dangerous, even though there wasn't live gunfire,
Yeah.
except maybe in a couple of places. You can still get hit by a flying tear gas canister or a rubber bullet or something.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And I heard it's
Mm.
quite difficult to work. Although even you have a press press accreditation, and CNN journalist, reporter was arrested as well.
Right. I mean, they're right. CNN, that was on live television. You know,
Yeah,
there was a journalist who got arrested, and so, you know, it's interesting because when I was working in Hong Kong, and we'll get to this a little bit later, but uh, you know, I wore a yellow press vest in Hong Kong. In the United States, like nobody does that. And
yeah,
so as a press person, as a photographer, as a camera person, reporter, whatever, if you're with the demonstrators, the police rarely make a distinction between a press person and a demonstrator. So if there's some street that they are trying to clear, a press pass is not going to allow you to stay in that intersection. They're gonna make you leave as well.
right.
Yeah.
Okay, and so, and this was the protest as well, the demonstration.
That's right. That's a demonstration. So the building in the background there is the United States Capitol. So
Mm-hmm.
that's also in Washington, D.C. And it's about maybe maybe 3 kilometers from the White House.
Mm-hmm.
So during these days, the protesters would often kind of, you know, march between the Capitol and the White House and kind of go back and forth a couple of times during the day. So this was a very, you know, spontaneous moment. There was this, you know, kind of maybe a group of about 200 or 300 protesters who marched down one evening, and
So this is
yeah,
the Black Lives Matter.
right. It's Black Lives Matter, and it's you know, other just sort of random people who are kind of associating themselves with that movement. So Black Lives Matter is one kind of official or, you know, one group of protesters that have given themselves a name, but the social movement has really brought in a lot of people from sort of different organizations, and a lot of people who just independent folks who support the idea of what it's about. So
So,
right.
so when you're taking protest demonstration photos, um, what goes through your mind in the process of making a good photo?
Mm,
I mean, because every photographer has got different way and style of working. You know,
mm,
others will look for shapes, lines, and expression, and others will sort of try to capture that moment of being spontaneous.
mm.
So, you know, if you would like to share with us, you know, how the way you work.
Mm. Well, one particular thing about this, the protests that I've photographed in the last few weeks here in the United States, it feels different from many of the other political demonstrations I've photographed here. It feels there's more gravitas to it. It actually feels more historical, and I think that the likelihood that this is going to lead to sort of a long-term social change is pretty good. And so before I even go out and take pictures, I'm thinking this is kind of a historical moment. And when I was first learning photography as a teenager, I was influenced a lot by some photography magazines that my dad had kept from the 1960s and 70s. And he was kind of a good, serious amateur photographer. And so he had all these magazines of the civil rights movement and the Vietnam War demonstrations in the United States. So the sense of being able to record history and to actually see this happen firsthand and to be able to document it, I take that really seriously. I mean, that was the main
Mm,
reason that I wanted to be a photojournalist. So I have that in mind before I even go out. That's the main thing that I'm thinking about, is sort of is how these pictures might be seen decades from now. So I'm trying to take a picture that conveys the mood, sort of the mood of the moment, the mood of the people who are involved, and then trying to do that in somewhat of an artistic way, so that the aesthetics of the picture are timeless enough that that it will last. So I don't want the pictures to look sort of too dated, 20 or 30 years from now. I hope that the aesthetics of the picture, it doesn't really matter. They could be from 10 years ago, or they could be from 100 years ago. It's sort of a classical aesthetic usually that I have in mind.
Right.
So this was in the same park. The first picture from the demonstrations that you showed of the policemen kind of in front of the White House. This is kind of the same place.
Mm-hmm.
And so this was one of those nights where the protesters came right up to some fences that were set around the perimeter of this park. And, the policemen with their riot shields were there as a buffer between the demonstrators and the park and the White House behind it. Yeah, and then you have this kind of historical statue there that they're around. So that's sort of what caught my eye about this photo.
So shooting under low light, do you have any problems, any difficulties handling the camera in terms of, because
Well,
many people find it quite difficult to shoot under low light condition?
Well, it was pretty low light, and I do I mean, it is not the easiest thing, and so I do end up with a lot of blurry frames sometimes in these situations because my shutter speed has dropped to a 15th or a 30th of a second or something like that. So yeah, you have to crank up your ISO, and you have to make some compromises about the sort of the image quality of the picture with still trying to get something that's sharp. So I always shoot a lot of frames. Like if it's low light, my shutter speed is dropped. I tend to shoot just more pictures to make sure that I've got something that's sharp.
Right. So so with this, so you shot lots of images on this lighting condition. Any advice that how do you know that you got a shot? I know digital you can sort of look at from viewfinder, but how do you know you got it? Because as I mentioned earlier, every photographer's got a different way, and once they got it, they knew it, they got it.
Right. Well, I mean, this is one situation where shooting digitally, it really helps being able to look at the back of the camera.
Yeah.
I don't advocate looking. We call it chimping here in the United States because it's sort of like sort of like a chimpanzee. Sometimes like looking at the picture, that was sort of an old joke, but I try not to do that too much under normal circumstances. But when I'm working in low light, I think it's really beneficial just to make sure that you have the right exposure, and things always look a little bit brighter on the screen than they do on the screen on the camera, right? Than they do when you put it up on the computer. So you kind of have to remember that. Yeah.
Okay. That's a nice photo.
Oh, thanks. Right. Yeah. So this was, I don't remember if it was the same night as the one before. It might have been a different one, but yeah, these are two young women who came out to kind of watch this demonstration. And, I think sometimes having photographed a lot of political demonstrations over the years, sometimes there's a quality about it that is, that feels a little bit like a contrived or a staged media event, where it's sort of like a photo op. But the protests in the last several weeks here have not been like that. They've really felt very true and very honest. And I mean, the sense of emotion that I get from the people in the crowd, I think is very compelling to me. So sometimes I'm trying to show the whole scene, and but there are other times, like in this picture, where I think just getting that kind of human connection is important to me. So I'll come up close, maybe use a 35mm lens to do something like that.
Right.
And
this,
right.
Yes.
Right, exactly. So tear gas canister getting fired from the police line, which is on the left side of the picture, into the protesters. So that was about midnight, I think, on one of these nights. the protests, they went pretty late. And like many protests that I've been to around the world, they may start in the late afternoon and they start out kind of peaceful. But once things get dark, and we'll see this like in the pictures from Hong Kong later, that's usually when the clashes start to happen.
So I noticed, none of them wearing any tear gas masks, so it must be quite painful to the eyes, and you get choked from the tear gas as well.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's exactly right. I think this was kind of in the early days of the protests here. It was maybe I don't know, the second or third night or something. And so a lot of the protesters didn't, they didn't have gas masks or anything. So, most of the media people that I work with, we sort of had them and we brought them. But yeah, I mean, as the days went on, you'd see more people in the crowd, with gas masks on or something. But yeah.
I know what's it like working under such conditions. So how do you get your photos, with your tear gas mask and goggles?
Well,
Yep.
yeah, I have I have a gas mask that has a full face like this. So
Yeah.
it's actually not too difficult to use the camera. I can see maybe about half of the frame when I'm
Yeah.
looking through the camera when it's up to my eye. But having a sense of what my lens is already, I don't use zoom lenses hardly ever. And so just knowing that I have a 35 or a 40 or a 50 on my camera helps me a lot. So it's almost like I don't necessarily need to frame the picture with the camera. I can almost do it just in my head first as I'm watching. So yeah, obviously
you know your equipment pretty well.
that helps a lot, right? To know your equipment well, right? So you can adjust your camera in the dark and with a helmet on and everything. Yeah.
Right. Bill, we have a question here from Malaysia. It says, I have a question about journalism or street photography. Will you, as the photographer, request permission to photograph the people before shooting? Or will you photograph first, then only show them that you have taken a photo, or even photograph in a long distance without people's permission and leave afterwards?
Well, actually, neither. I mean, we in the United States, it's legal to take pictures and publish those pictures of anyone who's in a public space. So there's actually there's certainly no legal need to ask permission first or even after you've taken the picture. There may be some circumstances where if you think someone is in sort of a vulnerable position and maybe the publication of that picture could be problematic for them, then, there may be some sensitivity that you can use. But for the most part, I don't, it's really kind of impossible anyway to ask ahead of time.
Yep.
And yeah, so we just take pictures. And I think if people are in a public space, particularly during a demonstration, they just have to assume that they're going to be on camera.
Yeah.
I mean, and it's not just,
yeah. Even it could be just a street photo, I think people have to understand about the copyright law. As long as you're in public, anyone can take a picture. It belongs to the photographer's right.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. Yeah. And it's not the same thing as going into a private business or somebody's home. Exactly.
Yeah.
Of course, that's a private situation and you do need permission, but on the street, it's no problem. Yeah.
And this, I believe you're focusing on the person's fees.
Yeah. Exactly right. So this is, I think this is with the M10P and like a 50 millimeter 1.4. Which I like to use in these situations just to get a little bit of the context of what the event is. But by using a shallow depth of field, I'm kind of able to just isolate one or two people in the photo. So I usually like to work fairly close to my subjects. I don't use telephoto lenses very often. So just having that range of like 35 to 50 and kind of being able to get in close. And it also allows me to really be observant and and watch people and just kind of see how they're reacting to the situation. So I feel it's much more of an intimate experience for me that way, to be immersed, to be inside the crowd, and react to people in a much kind of more human way than if I'm, at a distance.
So working on a 50 on a crowd, was it difficult? Because the 50 is quite narrow and quite tight angles.
Hmm.
So, how do you manage that? Because for me, I find it a bit of a challenge if shot on a 50 on such a big crowd.
Agreed. Well, I'll usually have a wide angle lens. I mean, I almost always have a wide angle lens
Yeah.
with me also, like a 35 or something, or a wide angle zoom. So I've got that with me to kind of get one of those wide scenes, kind of like that tear gas picture. I think that was a 35 millimeter. So I've got a camera with that kind of ready to go. But if I see something sort of like this situation where I want to come in and just
Yeah.
have it be a little bit cleaner and a little bit tighter, 50 is nice for that. Yeah.
Wow.
So, Mark Zuckerberg.
Yes.
Hmm.
That's pretty close, So was this on M10P?
Right. I think it was right. I think it was just the regular M10. I don't think I had a
Yeah.
P at the time, but yeah, I think this is a 40 millimeter lens, and this was a couple of years ago when Zuckerberg, who's the president of Facebook, came to the U.S. Capitol to testify about social media before Congress. Right. So this is when you photograph one of these hearings where there's a witness who basically he's spending all day sitting at that desk, which is a pretty boring and static situation to photograph. You can get him as the witness as that person is coming and going,
Yeah.
So that's always an opportunity, right? In the beginning, in the morning, and then when they take breaks, they'll leave. So, right, you're trying to catch something a little bit interesting during those moments.
So do you wait for that moment, or it catches your eyes and you take the photo, or you just wait for something to happen?
You very much have to wait for the moment in those situations, and that's a big part of photojournalism. I think is anticipating what those moments might be, so that as a photographer, you put yourself, you try to get yourself in the right place ahead of time, so that you're not reacting to something right at that moment. You have planned it out a little bit so that you're in the place where you want to be, where you think something might happen. So that's very easy to plan at a congressional hearing like this. But just out in the world, it's much more difficult. But that's part of the challenge, is to figure out where things are going to be and to get yourself there ready to take pictures, at the right time.
So I believe when you were there, there were photographers around as well.
A lot of photographers, and
Yeah.
and in those cases, everybody knows that that's a good
Yeah.
time to take the
Yeah.
pictures coming and
Yeah.
going. So yeah, there's probably 30 photographers right around me on both sides as I'm taking this.
So I suppose you got a right angle there, right in the middle of it. Yeah.
Right. It's very competitive too, getting that good spot. Yeah. So.
Mm-hmm. Right. And we have a question here.
Hmm.
Someone have asked, he has taken street photos of people in public places people have been offended and demanded that he delete these photos. Do you agree to the demand and lose that image or images, or stand on your ground and risk the physical aggression?
Well, fortunately, that hasn't happened to me too much. I think maybe it's happened 2 or 3 times that I can remember. So I mean, I certainly try to stand my ground. I don't remember anyone ever really threatening me about that. There may have been a couple of times when somebody is asked to see it and they were kind of upset, and maybe I just showed them to it very quickly, and then I kind of explained what I was doing. But I've never really had any problems with that. So where I felt like if I don't, either stand my ground and get beaten up, or or stick to the principles, I don't really think I've had to make that decision. So fortunately,
I suppose also all depends where the photo was taken, on which country. And
well, that's true too. I mean, and being in another country, I think that may change the way I think about it, because you have to be conscious of local sensitivities where you're working, and what sort of is the culture of this in one country might not be the same as the other country. So, I mean, certainly in the U.S., I know what the law is, so I can always
yes,
go back on that, but that may not be the case everywhere.
yeah, because as far as I know, in Germany, copyright law, if you take a photo in public, uh, people can demand that you delete their photo.
Oh,
Yeah. So,
okay.
so it's just slightly different copyright laws in different
Hmm.
countries, but I
Mm,
think internationally is quite standard all over the
mm,
world.
hmm. Right.
And that's
So
the U.S. president.
that's the U.S. president at the White House, and that's another one of those departures where he is, and every president does this. It's not just Donald Trump, but um, the helicopter will land on a big yard, a big lawn that's behind the White House, and before then, the president will come out and sometimes talk to the press for a few minutes. So. Yeah, so this was in the evening time. It was quite dark, and I think the light coming in from the left side, I think that's from a TV camera.
TV camera, yeah. So that the
Hmm.
TV camera like helps to light his face and light the side profile of him.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's the 51.4 again. Right,
1.4. Okay.
not much light. Yeah,
Yeah, I see the bit of motion blur, but that
exactly.
create the atmosphere.
Mm,
Yeah.
mm.
And someone asked here, 40 millimeter with M10. So you were thinking of the angle beyond the frame line, or any techniques to ensure you
Mm.
get the composition you wanted?
Right. So I use one of these old 40 millimeters from the 80s, I think, and you have to modify it a little bit so that it brings up the 35 millimeter frame lines on the Leica. And I found that the 35 frame lines are actually pretty close. Like uh, it at a little bit of a distance, maybe 3 meters and beyond, the frame lines for the 35 millimeter in the viewfinder of the M camera are actually pretty close to what you get with the 40 millimeter lens. You notice it more as you get closer, that you're getting less with the 40 than what the frame lines show. So it just takes a little bit of practice. So I just have to remind myself that, not to go too tight, to leave a little bit of space right around the frame lines for the composition.
Right. Okay. Before we move on, we are hearing background noise. If your screen is on mute, please unmute. Sorry, please mute your. Yep. Thank you. And this.
So this is an
David,
American
can you hear me?
politician named Bernie Sanders, who was running for president as a Democrat, and he lost the contest with Joe Biden, who will be running against Donald Trump in this next election. But this was not long after I moved to Washington, and Sanders is very distinctive with his white hair. So that's one of the things that caught my eye about this, and the clouds, of course.
So it must be a challenge taking photos of politicians because everything is prim and proper, and of course as a photojournalist, it's just not taking photos; it's also taking photos in an artistic way to get your message across. So what's your challenge towards that?
Right. That's exactly right, Mateus. There are a lot of what you would call photo opportunities, particularly in Washington, D.C., with the politicians, where they have an event where they're giving a talk, and the whole thing is just designed for the media. So there's usually two or three very obvious pictures to take in those situations. There's often a background that's set up for that, and angles that are almost like prearranged. So the challenge then becomes to get something that's different from that, because I know those kinds of pictures are going to end up in the newspapers and online. Um, and so, I'm always looking for something that's a little bit different. Um, and that just means moving around and trying to be, like you said, trying to be a little bit more artistic.
Right.
Mm.
See, like this photo as well. Though this is pretty eye-catching. Yeah. So.
Mm. Right. Thank you. So this is at the U.S. Capitol, and this was early this year during the impeachment hearings about against Donald Trump, or who
Do you
work
have to take
U.S. senators.
it take you long to get this photo, or you have to move around and to get the best angles? And
I moved around a little bit. Maybe I spent not too long, about 2 or 3 minutes, taking this picture, just trying a couple of different angles. Right. Mm.
and this was on the M.
That's on the M. That's also the 50, as a matter of fact, right, on the M10P. Mhm.
Amazing. I mean, under the low light condition,
Mm.
you don't even need to use a flash. Yeah,
Mm.
yeah, that's the
Mm.
beauty of it. No distraction.
Exactly. That's right. No distraction. That's right. Exactly.
And this is interesting. All the lakes and all the different. It looks very uniform.
Right, exactly. So this was during one of those congressional hearings that I was telling you about, and sometimes those things go on for hours, and it's just the same person at the desk talking. And as a photographer, it can be boring. So just to do that, all day long. And I don't have to stay for the whole thing, but if it's kind of interesting to listen to, it doesn't mean that it's going to be interesting to take pictures of, but I'm always looking around to see what else catches my eye. And so in this situation, yeah, I thought it was kind of funny. You had all these women who, this was, I don't want to get into the big backstory, but these are our friends and the wife and family of somebody who was testifying, the women anyway. So, they all were wearing the same kind of shoes and everything. And then I saw the men, and everybody was sitting there like that. So this is the one picture that we'll show today. That's a diptych. So it's two different pictures that I've just put together on one slide.
Right. So it must be a challenge because when nothing's happening, usually photographers, we try to capture the movements or an expression of facial expression or hand gesture, but
Mm.
what you capture it, is which a lot of us don't even see it. Yeah.
Mm.
Yes. So.
Right, right. Well, one of the reasons I came to Washington was I was curious what it was like to work here, and see the event from more of an inside perspective. Because when you watch it on TV, you're only seeing kind of what the official kind of scene is, right? You're seeing the politicians, you're seeing the person who's testifying, if it's a hearing. Um, but you don't really see much else of what's happening in the room. And that's what I was very curious about, was to try to see if there was something that I could find interesting in these places. And I don't always see it, but now and then there's something kind of that amuses me, or that I find that gives a little bit of context to the event.
Mm-hmm. There's a question here. Do you consciously check your own biasness when photographing events?
That's a good question. I do try to think about that. Yes, about what my own biases are, and I don't really believe that anyone can truly be objective. I mean, there's this kind of an idea that some people have of objective journalism, and I don't think that really exists, because we all were human beings and we all have our own biases. So I think that's the best thing I can do, is just to try to be aware of what my own biases might be and how that's kind of impacting the way I'm photographing a situation. So I don't want to take those out completely. Like, I don't think I can anyway. And I'm not pretending that I don't have biases. I just, try to do work that to me is honest. That's the best I can do.
Right.
So, yeah.
That's what photojournalism is all about, honest reporting.
Right, right.
And it looks like this, we are in Hong Kong.
Right. So I went to Hong Kong last fall for about 10 or 11 days. I had been there a few times before, and then when I saw the protests happening last year, I just thought this was such an interesting situation. I really wanted to go and try photographing it, and chose to do it in black and white. And yeah, it was an amazing experience to be there.
So covering the U.S. demonstration in Hong Kong is, I would say, is a totally different atmosphere and different vibes there of tension. And how do you handle that when you're in Hong Kong?
Well, yeah, it's interesting. I mean, there are different vibes, and there is a different kind of tension, but in some ways, the situation is quite similar. In that, I mean, both in the U.S. and Hong Kong, most of the demonstrators themselves are young people. They're teenagers, or they're people in their 20s. I mean, sometimes you find older people there as well, but actually, what interests me sometimes is just the similarities in these kind of political activities around the world, and the motivations of the people are actually quite similar. The details of the political situations are different. What people, the exact reasons that people are demonstrating in the United States compared to Hong Kong, those, the specifics are different, but the overall feeling can often be quite similar. And finding those similarities in human experiences, I find that's kind of one of the things that interests me as a photojournalist. I mean, the working conditions may be a little bit different. I mean, one of the things I'll mention is that in Hong Kong, like, I never had any problem at all, really, with the demonstrators confronting me in any way whatsoever. I mean, there were some times that they didn't want things photographed, and they would put up umbrellas to block the view of cameras. But in general, the crowd was quite friendly to journalists, and that's not always the case. I mean, that's, in the United States, sometimes there's actually some tension between the press and the demonstrators, just like there is with the police. So yeah.
And we have a question from Noel. It says here, David, are there any photographs you took that you consider that stands out from the rest of your work? If yes, why?
Well, I think for me, I mean, certainly I'm always trying to take pictures that that stand out just for myself, right? Pictures that I like, that I think are elevated above things that I've done previously. So I'm always looking for a moment that I think captures what a scene, how things felt to me, and a picture that has meaning, and then also a picture that is aesthetically well designed, so that it's sort of it reads well to the eye, but it's a little bit complicated. And I like pictures that, that you can spend a little bit of time looking at different parts of the picture to find things that are interesting. So I'm always looking for that.
And what makes a good photo for you?
Yeah, I think trying to find a good composition, something that's not too simple, I think is important for me. So.
And of course, equipment does matter to get what you want to get. So.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you and I, we were talking about the M cameras the other night, and I know that you've used those for a long time, and so have I. And one of the reasons I like using the M, and I use mirrorless cameras sometimes as well, but but the M in particular, because you're just looking through that very clear viewfinder, you know, it just, you really pay attention to all different parts of the picture. Everything is just sort of even and clean. And so uh, it's, um, it's you know, very easy to, well, it's not easy, but it makes it more clear just to find the different compositional elements of the picture and to try to arrange those, not just side to side, but also kind of back to front. So you have like a foreground, a middle, and a background as well.
So, you know, there are many people out there, they find it, the M system is a bit of a challenge for them, but it's actually it's very simple camera. Once you know it, you nail it almost immediately, you know, in terms like focusing, exposure wise. And do you have any advice, you know, the way you take the photos, you work with your equipment?
Mm. Well, that's, you know, that's a good point. It is a very simple camera, and that's one of the main reasons I like using it, because you have the shutter speed, the aperture, and focus, and that's basically it. That's really all you're thinking about. There's not, you know, there are not 25 different buttons on the M cameras. It's very clean. It's very elegant, um,
Yeah,
but it does take some practice. And I remember in the film days, you know, I started out when I was a young guy, a newspaper photographer, using SLRs. I used Nikon
yeah.
SLRs in those days, and sometime in the mid 90s, a friend loaned me his M6. And so that was the first time I'd ever used an M camera, but I loved it right away, and I bought one. But I have to say that it took me maybe about a year of using that camera on a regular basis
Hmm.
before I felt like I was as fast with that camera as I was with the SLR. So a lot of it is just spending time with the camera. You know, it's just getting used to it. And getting the kind of, we call it muscle memory, just
Muscle
like an
memory.
athlete, like playing, right, muscle memory. Like you play tennis, the
Yeah,
more you play it, the more your muscle remembers how to hit the ball, you know, forehand, backhand, whatever. You know, I play
yeah,
a little tennis, and
yeah.
using the camera, it's the same. It's just, you know, getting used to the focusing and the shutter speed and all that. So,
Right. Let's see your next photo. This is pretty interesting. You know, here you are, you're
mm.
capturing the guy, the police, you know, shouting, yelling, and right in front is this, on the foreground, this guy on the phone taking a picture of it. What was
Right.
happening at that moment?
Right, a very a very modern scene. So there was some, I don't remember what this set this off, but there was some sort of a clash. This was in somewhere in central Hong Kong, you know, between the protesters and the police, and the police were trying to create kind of a perimeter. I think maybe they had just arrested somebody, and so yeah, it was just one of those moments of tension, you know, and uh, you just don't know how things are going to play out. But you know, to try to get in close and to try to get some of that emotion that's quite real here in the scene.
Hmm. And this was shot on the M10 and convert to monochrome.
Correct. Right. Converted to monochrome. Yeah. Which is something I should mention, that um, when I went to Hong Kong, I was thinking of doing it in black and white. Most of the photographers who'd been covering, you know, the events in that year, last year, were doing it in color, and a
Color.
lot of the
Yeah.
pictures were really beautiful. But I thought it would be interesting to try it in black and white. So even though I'm shooting raw, in my head, as I'm photographing, I'm thinking of that the pictures are going to be in black and white.
So do you find the difference? I mean, shooting, you're using a color, shooting color and then thinking of a black and white.
hmm Yeah, I think so. I mean, the when you're working in black and white, you're dealing with fewer things that you're trying to organize. So when there's color, you know, it's very likely that somewhere in the scene there are going to be some color elements that may be distracting to the composition or sort of to the overall meaning and
Hmm.
feel of the picture. Whereas with black and white, it's much easier to um, to kind of distill everything just into emotion and expression and composition. So particularly in a very fast moving environment and scene where you may not have control over the design of the picture,
Hmm.
you know, being able to work in black and white is, you know, there are some advantages to that.
So being said that, does that make any difference shooting with the M in, say, with the DSLR camera, shooting a color and converting to black and white? If because you were saying that, you know, you don't have to think so much about all the gadgets and all the menu. So does that cut down a lot of your process thinking much better?
I think it does. I think it's right. And so yeah, the advantage to that then when you're out working is that you can just concentrate on the content of the photo, and particularly in photojournalism. I mean, I'm not saying, you know, obviously I have a lot of color photojournalism work, but there is kind of an advantage in a way of being able to just think about what is the meaning of this situation, you know. And if somebody has on a yellow poncho or jacket or something that visually may be very distracting, but doesn't have anything to do with the meaning of the situation. When you're working in black and white, particularly like if you're using the M camera and you're just, you know, everything is very clean, everything is very simple, looking through that viewfinder. And that just means that you get right into the most important activity and the expressions that are you think reflective of the situation. So.
Right. And we have a question here. What is your default mode? Aperture, shutter, or manual?
Oh, exposure mode, usually manual. Almost all the time, actually, I shoot in manual exposure.
On your default mode?
Yes.
Yes, I think most photographers prefer that way, so they got more control. Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly.
And that's what the M is good for that, you know. Like we here, Catherine from Australia saying the M system provides simplicity and reliability. So there aren't fiddly bits which can take away, which can take time away from the composition, which I totally agree with that.
That's right.
Yeah. And this is a great shot. You know, you must have gone down at a low angle.
Yeah. Right.
And this was shot during
very.
Yeah. This was shot during the night?
No, this was during the daytime, but it was right in Central, and so it was kind of you know, there were some tall buildings, and maybe it was cloudy that day. I don't remember, but it looks a little bit low light. But so it was not in the sun. But yeah.
So in the midst of all this happening, you know, as a photojournalist, it's not just taking photo. You know, you got to watch your surrounding, make sure you're not hurt, make sure you're not in danger. So as I mentioned earlier, every photographer works in a different manner. How would you handle in such situation? I'm sure you know our audience would love to hear your how the way you handle it.
Well, for me personally, like I always put safety first, and so you know, I never put myself in a situation where I think this is really, really dangerous, and I think there's a high likelihood that something is going to happen to me. You know, I'm always trying to, as you know, Mateus, I mean, you've done this so much as well, that you try to find that balance. You know that it's important, and you're there for a reason to document this event. But if you go in there and then you get hurt, well, you're not going to be able to work anyway. So you're always able, you know, you always have to find a way of working where it's kind of a compromise, really, between going somewhere sometimes and getting a picture from a certain angle, and then weighing it out about what the risks might be by doing that. So it's very fluid. I mean, it changes. It can change from second to second. So,
yes, very unpredictable.
Yeah, it's unpredictable. And then also, I mean, the more you do it, the more you have done it over the years, you know that you get a better feeling for how to make those kind of decisions.
Were you in any danger?
Well, in Hong Kong, I mean, it didn't. I mean, compared to some other things I've done, it didn't feel as lethal as some
Hmm.
other things, you know, that you and I have done, Mateus, like in war zones,
Yeah.
um, you know, where there's gunfire and things like that. But you know, there's still certainly there's still risks. Sure. Yeah.
In this photo. So
Obviously taken at night, right? I think this is in Mongkok.
Hong Kong.
And yeah, I don't remember if that's Mongkok Station or not, but
I
yeah,
think it's
this
Hong
was
Kong. Yeah.
oh, you think it is? Okay,
Yes.
Mongkok Station. Yeah, right. So
Yeah.
you remember you were there.
Yeah.
So right. Um, mm.
So this photo is right at the moment. So you must be pretty quick in order to get the shot.
Right. Well, you know, once the demonstrators set that subway entrance on fire, you know, that's obviously there's sort of some kind of a picture that can be made there. So I put myself into a place where I saw that there were just ordinary civilians, not demonstrators, but just people who were sort of in that scene. They needed to get by, and so I chose an angle where I was able to. I photographed maybe 3 or 4 different people, you know, running in that same place over just very quick, maybe just less than 5 minutes, you know. Um, so it's not, yeah, so I didn't see her and then run over. I was already there, you know,
Right.
planning that picture out roughly,
Uh-huh.
and planning the composition out, and then she ran by.
Okay. And this is a different scene now.
A very different scene, a much more peaceful scene. So the next group of pictures, and the final group of pictures, I think maybe they're about 7 or 8 pictures. They're from a project that I started a few years ago called Seeing Buddha. I personally am interested kind of intellectually in Buddhism, and I started reading about it maybe 10 years ago. I've always loved Henri Cartier-Bresson. He's one of my heroes of photography, and he read a book in the 1950s called Zen and the Art of Archery, which was written by a European guy who studied Kyoto in Japan, which is a kind of a martial art, and there's certain um, uh, similarities and ideas that are discussed in that book about doing that exercise, that archery, with Buddhist concepts, and Bresson was very interested in that, and he tied that into the experience of being a photographer and trying to go out with the idea of putting one's eyes, head, and heart in the same alignment. That was a phrase that he invented. So I thought that it would be interesting to try to do that and to make Buddhism itself the subject of a photo project. So the next 2 or 3 pictures are done on film, on an you know, Tri-X film on a Leica M4, which I bought just for this project. And this is along the Ganges in India,
Mm.
where Buddhism started, where the Buddha himself went, you know, during those years as he was sort of getting enlightened. So yeah, I kind of went back to the roots of my own photography, which was black and white film.
So how long have you been working on this project on Zen?
I think I started it in 2012, and I made I think 3 trips to different countries in Asia to work on it, and I still feel like maybe there's part of it that's not quite finished yet. I mean, it's gotten published quite a bit in magazines and in a couple of books, but you know, I'm still kind of working on it for my own book. So um, yeah, it's ongoing.
Right. And this is what's in India.
Also in India, this is in Bodh Gaya, which is right. This is right near the famous Bodhi tree where the Buddha sat during his enlightenment, and this was during a kind of a celebration of his life that's held every year on his birthday. So I planned my trip to Bodh Gaya around that day, knowing there would be a lot of pilgrims coming from different parts of the world. In fact. to kind of celebrate his life in that moment.
So going back into your photography, you know, shooting conflict and gone to the extreme on Zen, do you find that your shooting style is still based on the same way, how the way you see things, how the way you photograph, or your way of thinking is totally different when shooting on your Zen project?
Hmm. My way of thinking is actually pretty much the same, and I think of it all as part of the human experience. I mean, that's been my work. Most of my career has been photographing people. I mean, there's some nature photographers and
Yes,
plenty of other interesting specialties in photography, but my specialty has been people,
people.
and I find that just trying to get kind of a deep sense of people's emotion and what they might be thinking and experiencing in a situation, whether it's a political moment or they're having a transcendental moment in a spiritual context. To me, that's all the same, and I approach it in the same way. With the Seeing Buddha project, there were some instances where I deliberately used specific photographic techniques just in one place, and I used them like the black and white film. I used that just in India, because I wanted to kind of change maybe the way I was working as a photographer a little bit, so
Yes.
sometimes shooting, black and white film, sometimes changing color process and things like that. But the core of the experience is really the same. It's just like Prasan said, it's eyes, it's head, and it's heart, trying to put all those things together as I'm photographing.
So besides Henry Cartier-Bresson, any photographers that you are influenced by?
Oh, sure. Oh, it's a long list. But one of my all-time favorite photographers is an American named William Albert Allard,
Mm-hmm.
who worked for National Geographic magazine in the I think the 60s, 70s, and the 80s primarily. Is continuing to work. He still shoots a lot, and he's known as a color photographer, and so his work was very inspirational to me. Um, uh, Over the years. David Allen Harvey is another one.
Mm-hmm.
James Noctway, very classic
Yes.
photojournalist, certainly. So, right, it's Diane Arbus. I mean, I'm always interested in photographers whose work is very distinctive, and like if you go in a museum and you see 5 or 6 Diane Arbus pictures on the wall, I mean, there's a similar feeling to all those
Yes.
pictures. There's something
Consistency.
about her sense of,
Yeah.
right, a consistent sensibility, the way she sees the world, and it makes an artistic statement. And I think that's what we all aspire to do, is try to do some kind of a very personal impression on our work that gives it a thread.
That's the hardest part, isn't it?
That is the
Yeah.
hardest part,
That's the hardest part.
right?
Yeah.
That is absolutely the hardest part. It's a lifelong thing, and yeah.
Yeah.
So
It's easy to take a photo, but it's difficult to get a good picture, a good photo.
exactly, right, right. So this is Bodh Gaya again. This is the same. I think it's the same day as the picture before. Yeah, and this was just a great, just a great scene. And I didn't know that this exact scene was gonna happen. I was just walking around that day in some neighborhood, and I happened to see this procession of people celebrating. I think it's called Jayanta, the Buddha's birthday.
Yeah.
So yeah, the animals, everything appealed to me about this.
Yes. Everything's happening in one
Mm,
picture. Yeah.
mm, mm,
And that.
mm.
Any
Yeah.
particular reason why you took this photo? It's eye-catching.
What,
You know,
mm.
not many of us
Well,
would get the angle.
well, some of these monks, it was very clear. I mean, these are not people they're not driving Mercedes, to go to this festival. I mean, a lot of people, you know, I'm sure they walked a long way. They took buses. I mean, it's a very arduous journey for them to get there for that. But I think it shows how meaningful it is to these people that they would undertake such a difficult journey, for particularly for somebody maybe who doesn't have a lot of money. You know, this is the feat of a monk. Um, and you know, it's one of the things I like to do also is maybe the last picture shows a little bit of a wide scene so that you're getting a lot of information. But sometimes there'll be one thing that is a detail that might be revealing to me. So I want to do a kind of a close-up of that. Yeah.
So do you have to do it quick, or you know the monk was there, and you know you could have time to take several shots on this?
I probably got a few shots, maybe 5 or 6 frames of this, and that was it. I mean, it's a pretty simple picture to compose and to take,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
yeah, that's part of it. Like you were saying, I mean, you have to be a little bit fast, you know, in
yeah,
these situations.
yeah. Because
Mm.
in places like that, you know, they don't really pose for the photographer. They just do their own things, you know, and they just if they need to walk, they just walk, you know. So sometimes it can be quite a challenge. Yeah.
Mm. Right, exactly. And I don't like it when people pose for me. I mean, unless I'm doing a portrait and I'm
Yeah,
asking them to do that.
yeah,
I much prefer people just to be themselves, and I just want to photograph the scene as it would be
it
happening
is. Yeah,
if I were not there, you know.
yeah,
Um, and so yeah, that's one of those situations. So that means that you just have to be very observant, you
yeah.
know, move quickly. I saw somebody just ask why I chose the M4 for that project.
Yes, pretty
And the
interesting.
reason was I just wanted the simplest camera I could get. I mean, it doesn't even have a light meter in it, right? So
Hmm.
that meant that I had to use a handheld light meter. So I would just get the exposure ahead of time and then just set the camera to that, and that's it. So when I'm taking pictures, all I'm really thinking about is just, you know,
Yes,
just looking through the camera and
the
just finding my
composition,
composition.
creativity. Yeah,
Mm, mm.
this is interesting shot. A very interesting perspective.
So, well, that is a double exposure, and this was it was an accident actually, and it was towards the end of the roll, and I messed up when I was winding the camera, but it
Uh-huh.
was one of those happy accidents. When I looked
Yeah.
at the picture later, obviously, you know, I couldn't have planned this out, so it's the only double exposure that I have in this series. But it was
Wow.
such a weird thing that I just, you know, I loved it right away.
It looks as though it was shot on through the glass and through the reflection of it. Yeah. Yeah. Pretty interesting.
Let's see, I think there's maybe 2 or 3 more pictures in the series.
And this,
Hi, Mateus. Can you hear me? Okay.
yep, yep, I can hear you. Yep. And what about this photo?
Sorry, I think we just had. Could you say that again,
What
Mateus,
about this
please?
photo? Can you hear me?
Mm.
Can you hear me?
Yeah. Is this the kids with the Buddha in the background again? That's what. Yes, I can hear you.
Okay.
Yes. Um, Sorry, our connection. Yes, I can hear you.
Okay,
Right.
great,
So this,
great.
oh yeah, oh, this photo. So this is in Bhutan, and this was these monks are practicing for a festival that's gonna take place in a few weeks, and I was just lucky to be at the temple on the day, one of the days that they were practicing. And during the festival, they're not wearing their monk robes; they're dressed as sort of like animals.
Yeah,
So I thought it was, you know, which is interesting too. But I thought it was really cool that these monks are doing this dance, you know, in their monk robes. Yeah. So this is a very Henri Cartier-Bresson influenced composition.
right, right. So do you have to sort of wait for that moment to capture uh, the foreground of the monk coming in, David? Can you hear me, David? David, hello. I think
Right. I think this was a case where I took a lot of frames of this situation. I knew it was going to be interesting. So yes, yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me okay?
yes, loud and clear.
Yeah. Yeah. Hi. Sorry.
Yep.
Yeah, we might have a little internet is a little slow or something. Can you
Yes.
hear me okay,
Yes.
Mateus?
Yep. I can hear you. I can
Hmm.
hear you.
Okay. Yeah, sorry, I'm not sure if I'm coming through. Am I coming through now, Mateus?
Yes, you are.
Okay.
You are
Right.
coming through.
So, okay, thanks. So this was a case where I did do a lot of frames trying to get an arrangement there. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
And was it shot on film or digital?
Okay. Great. Um,
Was this
right. So
taken?
I'm trying to wait for the moment where the
Yeah.
monk. Sorry.
Yeah. Was it shot on film or digital? Can you hear me?
Uh, I'm really sorry,
Yeah.
Mateus. You're breaking up a little bit.
Was this taken on film or digital?
Oh, film. Oh, this was digital.
Digital.
Digital. Yeah.
Yeah. So someone asked. Yeah. So this is a brilliant shot. You know, the way the monk
Yes. Yes,
does
I
it.
can hear you. It's digital. Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
This is digital, Mateus. Yeah.
So the light
Mm-hmm.
rays coming in. This is a beautiful
Mm.
shot. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you get this? You know, I'm sure. Yes. You know, the lights coming in. Uh,
Mm. Thank
you
you.
know,
It was a really great scene. Right. And it's one of those things that you cannot plan. Like,
yep. And exposure wise must be a challenge for
mm.
this.
Right. So this was at someone's home. This is also Bhutan, and I was told by my I had a driver, a guide when I was working in Bhutan, and he told me one day that somebody he knew, um, that there were going to be a few monks were going to come to his friend's house, my driver's friend, and hold a ceremony in the house. So it was something that the monks do every year. And they were meditating and they were praying in this room in the home, like all day long. So I went in, and the monks lit incense in the room. And so there was one moment where kind of like, I think it was quite cloudy that day, but the clouds broke away and the sunlight came in through the window and lit up the incense in the room. So it was just a
Um,
beautiful moment. It took no great skill to take this picture. It was just a very obvious
yeah,
an
but
obvious thing.
I suppose it's also it's through your observation. You know, that's how you captures you caught your eye. Yeah.
Mateus, can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you. Yeah. Hmm. And this is very interesting. The motion blur movements.
This is also digital.
Mhm. So this was still in Bhutan.
Hmm. I'm sorry, I had a little trouble hearing you. Mhm.
Yep. Was this still in Bhutan? I think there's a slight delay between both of us. I think there's the internet.
Mm.
It's a bit slow. Can you hear me
Okay,
now,
great.
David?
Thanks. Mm.
Hi, David. Hi, David, can you hear me? Can I suggest that maybe David and Matthias will log out for a little while and then log back in, and then so that we can restart. I know we just have a few more photos.
Right.
Yeah, maybe just sorry everyone. So let's have David to just exit for a little while, and you log back in, and we see if the connection is better.
Okay.
I can hear you. Sorry for the connection problem, but right. So this is yes. Hi Shirley. Yes, I can hear you.
Okay.
So this is
Shirley. Can you type? Can you type to David?
Can you guys hear me okay? I just reset my internet. Yeah.
I think we will try to log out and log in again, as what Shirley suggested. Can you hear me?
Okay.
Um,
Can you hear me now?
no.
Okay, I can hear you, Matthias.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, but
yes,
you were breaking up.
I can hear you. Okay.
Sorry, everybody. You know, there's been internet so much for technology.
How is this now? I've logged out. Yeah. Is that better? Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes, I can hear you now.
Please exit. Okay, I'm gonna exit Zoom. Okay. Sorry.
Exit.
Okay.
I'm gonna exit as well, and stay with us. We'll be back soon.
Thank you.
We are back. Can you hear me, David? David, you have to unmute.
Hi.
Yes.
I can hear you. Can you hear me okay
Yes,
now?
I can hear you.
Okay. Apologies. Sometimes the internet in the United States is not so terrific.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry, Shirley. Can you put back me on the screen, please? On the PowerPoint, David's PowerPoint. Thank you. Okay. Sorry, everybody. Once again, apologies. As mentioned, internet was slow, so there's a bit of a lag. but hopefully it will be better now. So yes, going back to this photo, David.
So this was done on color negative film, also on the M4. And one of the things I wanted to do with the Seeing Buddha project was to try some pictures that were a little bit more impressionistic, having used digital almost full time for the last several years. Digital pictures are very clean and they can kind of be technically perfect. But I wanted, with this particular project, to do a little experimenting with some blur and a little bit of graininess. So I used a neutral density filter on the lens, which would allow me to use a slow shutter speed. And then I kind of overdeveloped the film called push processing to give a little grain, a little bit more atmosphere.
Mm-hmm. So David, we got someone saying that all your photos are great. So how do you make great photos? I know it's
Well,
a silly question, because people always think that it's so easy to take pictures, but once you're into photography, you're dead serious about it. Only then you realize it's so difficult to get a good photo. So someone has commented all the photos are great.
Well. Well, thanks. And I should mention that, first of all, I've been doing this a long time. And second of all, this is my job and I do this a lot. So the more you go out and take pictures, the more opportunities you will have to take good pictures. And I learn every year. I feel like I've learned something about photography, even though I've been doing it for a long time. So that's one of the beautiful things about it. That's one of the things that I love most about photography, is that it's not like you ever get to a certain point and then you just stop. There's so many possibilities. There's different ways of working. There's different kinds of photography that you can do, and you can change your style as you go along. And also, just as you get older and you get interested in different things, then it becomes more it becomes more interesting and sort of more challenging.
So talking about style, do you think you've changed your style in the years of your photography?
I think so. I think a little bit. It has. Hopefully, my style has gotten a little bit more deep, like in a meaningful way, and I'm trying to do pictures that that will last and that are not just for the moment. I started out as a newspaper photographer, and when one is doing that work, your primary goal is to take pictures that are going to be in the newspaper the next day. So you're thinking about that. What is the new? What is the immediate meaning of a news event or something that you're covering? Whereas now I'm more interested in pictures that I hope will be interesting to people, 20, 30 years from now or 100 years from now. Something about there's a little bit more emotion and more depth in the picture. So that's my goal right now.
Fantastic. And is this through a reflection through the glass?
Yes, it is. It's a reflection. So this is also in Burma, and so I'm photographing into a temple, and reflected in the window of the temple is a pagoda behind me. And this was on New Year's Day. It's a day of celebration and prayer and meditation for these monks. And so, yeah, I was just trying to kind of create those layers of experience that were somehow reflective of their own personal meditative experience.
So this is in Rangoon, I suppose, or now they call it Yangon.
It's actually it's at Golden Rock in another part of the country. I forget the name of the town, but it's about 3 or 4 hours from Yangon.
In a lake? Is it in a lake?
No, it's not Inland Lake. I never went there actually. I can't remember the name of the town, but there's a very famous big rock, golden rock.
Yes.
I mean, it's painted gold, right? And that's sitting right on the edge of a mountain. And so this is that place.
Bagan. Someone just wrote in Bagan.
It's not begun. No,
Mandalay?
no. Oh, okay. Okay. Well, this could be a quiz.
Yeah.
I'll have to look it up, but
Right.
it's not Mandalay. No,
No.
no.
Uh-huh. Or could be in Kalor. I don't know whether you've been to Kalor.
Yeah, that might be it. That sounds familiar.
Yeah.
That sounds familiar.
Mhm. Wow, this is a great shot, you know, with the smoke.
This is Bagan.
Bagan. Yeah.
Right. So this is at one of the smaller temples in Bagan, but this was also, it was during a holiday, during a celebration. So I timed my visit to Bagan on this, to be there for these couple of days. And again, slow shutter speed. You can see one of the things I did in this project when I was using color negative was I took called an X-Acto knife, just a very fine bladed pen, and I scratched onto the negative itself to kind of create a frame line
Right.
onto the negative. So I deliberately shot the pictures a bit loose, and then I created the composition, the crop on the negative itself, just to make it like one of a kind, not on the computer, but very tactile experience. Okay, somebody is just Golden Rock is in Kyoto.
Yeah.
All right, so
Yes.
thank you.
Yeah. And someone has wrote tip, you know, saying that I do was shooting with the Leica, take a few shots on your cell phone in the same location, and the GPS will mark your location with the timestamp. That's interesting. Yeah.
Good tip. Yeah,
Good
I
tip.
like
Yep.
it. Nice.
Yeah.
Right, right.
And we have a question here. Do you go into a situation, both politics and Zen, looking for specific shots, or do you let the scenario unfold itself? I think we went through that. Yeah.
Yes, I mean, I think when I'm working as a journalist, I usually have something in mind that I think will be a likely important picture, but not too specific. It's really, I'm really open to the experience for the most part. I think that's the most important thing for me, is just to not have too many ideas ahead of time of exactly what I want to take pictures of, but to be just aware. And that's part of the Zen concept, I think, is just to be very, very present and open to what the experience will bring you.
Yep. Like this is saying, you know, just expect the unknown. You never know what will come out. Yeah.
Exactly. Right. Right.
Yeah.
And that makes it much more interesting, right?
Yes.
Because
And how do you get this photo? It's this pretty interesting angle, you know, with the background of the leaves and the trees, and you got a fish there.
right, right. So this is a pond. This is in Japan, and
Get it
so
now.
this is a
Yeah.
koi fish. So I'm my camera is pointed at the water,
Reflection. Yeah.
right, and then you're getting the reflection of the trees in the
Oh,
background.
interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's very interesting. And I suppose that's your last photo.
I think that's the last one, right? So
Yeah.
that's it's a very Zen, a very Zen scene, right?
So would there be a book on your project on Zen?
There will be a book that will be called Seeing Buddha, and I mean, I've been working on this for a few years, so I'm not sure when it will come out, but someday it will come out.
So if you have any questions, please feel free to type on the chat box. David will be more than happy to answer your questions regarding, photography and, artistic way of thinking, because there again, as I mentioned earlier, every photographer works in a different way. Everybody thinks differently. So we could be in the same spot, but we'd be shooting in different angles. Yeah. So, and of course, and if you want to know more about David's work, you can go to his website. David's got an Instagram as well and Twitter. So, yes, and don't forget to tune in to the unveiling of the new M family member tomorrow night at 9 p.m. Singapore time, hosted by Leica chairman, Dr. Andreas Kaufmann. So please sign in. That's got the link. So tomorrow is the opening of the new Leica family.
Yeah, I just want to thank you, Matthias, and everyone at the Leica team in Singapore for hosting me. It was great to talk to you, and thank you everyone for joining in and for the interesting questions. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Sorry, apologies. It's not tomorrow. It's on Thursday night, 9 p.m. Singapore time. Today is Tuesday in Singapore. So the opening of the new Leica family is on Thursday. Please take note. It's on Thursday night, 9 p.m. Singapore time. Yeah. So David, once again, thank you so much. It's been an eye-opening, because it's always interesting to hear different photographers sharing their thoughts, their ideas, how the way they work. Again, as I mentioned, everybody works differently. We could be in the same line of it, same line in the same profession, but we work differently, and we have our own style of shooting, and everybody uses the M in a different way as well. So. So your technique of using the M is interesting, of how the way you look at it, and you use on 50, and 50 on the big, on the crowded area environment is harder, because you've got so many things around you, and the way you capture it is beautiful, because you're able to isolate what you just what you don't want to show, to make a good photo.
Right. Well, thank you. Right, and I don't I don't use that 50 all the time. Sometimes I do have to go to the wide angle, but
Yeah.
but thank you. And it's I just want to say again that it's a process, and it's I hope that in 5 years from now I am not taking pictures exactly the same way I work now, and that's just the great thing about photography, is that you evolve as a person and as a photographer, and it just becomes it's a lifelong creative process.
It's great. And someone's commented saying that I love your Hong Kong series and Zen so much, can relate to them real well due to their promopsy of my life. So that's great. So which means you've done something that you have relayed your photos. You got your message across. So fantastic.
Oh,
any advice?
Well, thank you very much.
Any advice before we go? Any advice to people out there about about your how we can take better photos?
Well, I just had the opportunity to do an online academy with Leica here in the United States, and the theme was Zen photography, but the subject matter of the participants' work was very open. It's not like you have to go photograph Zen scenes, but the idea of the Zen approach, where as you try to simplify your technique as much as possible before you even walk out the door, so that you're familiar with your camera and you kind of have an idea about your ISO, and do you want your pictures to be in color or black and white, or what you're going to do before you start taking pictures. So all that is, you just don't worry about that. You don't pay too much attention to the buttons and the dials on your camera. So when you're on the scene, it's just a very pure experience. So it's you as a photographer, you as a person relating to the subject. It's how you see it, it's how you think about it, how you feel it, and you are trying to take pictures that reflect that experience. So the more you can put the technical aspects of it aside during the act of taking pictures, I think the better chance you have to connect with the subject. And that doesn't matter whether you're photographing people or even landscape. You know, it can be a moving subject or it can be a static subject. But if you are very present in the scene without distractions, then I think the process becomes deeper and more meaningful.
Thank you. Thanks for the advice. Well, once again, thank you so much for joining us, the Leica Conversations. And I use the word, you know, with our Leica experience. So to get to know more about photos, your equipment. So that's what we're here for. You know, we're here to share our knowledge and to pass it around so that we can take better photos and be better people. So once again, thank you.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure to see you and to talk to you.
Thank you. Thanks, David.
Thank you.
Thank you. So